What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the Modern Warfare 2 beta is now over, and therefore I wanted to share my sort of final thoughts and feedback after 2 weeks of the beta. In this, I'm going to be going over a bunch of the things I'm liking about Modern Warfare 2 so far, based on what we've seen in the beta, as well as the main points of feedback and constructive criticism that I have in relation to this game. The main things that I hope see some adjustment between beta and launch. Now, in order to keep this video a reasonable length, I'm actually going to save the little things. I'm going to have a totally separate video just talking about the little things that I'd like to see adjusted, the more nitpicky aspects that don't have a massive impact on the game, but I feel could use some improvement. Today's video is just going to be focusing on the bigger things. And diving right in, let's have a look at some of the things that I like about Modern Warfare 2 based on my beta experience. Keep in mind, this section is going to be much shorter than the feedback section simply because I'm basically just going to list out what I like, whereas when I'm talking about the things I don't like, it's going to require a lot more explanation as well as potential suggestions for improvement. So one of the things I really like about this is the general gunsmith structure and weapon unlock trees, where you have different platforms of weapons and you have to unlock your weapons through those platforms. When we're talking about that part specifically, I love the fact that this is going to encourage a lot more weapon variety in the game, because if you want that Lockman SMG, for instance, you're going to have to use a weapon in a different class, but with the same platform, in order to get that unlocked. And I think encouraging variety is great. I'm really happy to see this, as long as the weapon progression rates are reasonable, which I think they were in the beta, so I hope we don't see that change significantly for launch. Next up, another thing that I said in my initial impressions that I liked about this game is the general map design for 6v6. I feel like this was a big step forward from Modern Warfare 2019, at least on average, of course. And after putting a ton of time into the beta, I stand behind this. I think the map design itself is generally quite good in this game. Now, unfortunately, I feel like the spawns can often make these maps play way worse than they should be playing, but we'll talk about that in the feedback section. Going off of that, it's not just the map layouts I also like the color palettes that they're using. There's a lot more color than we normally see with Infinity Ward games, and I do think this breathes a lot of life into the game. It's nice to look at when it comes to the color palettes. And also, general player visibility outside of gunfights, I feel is, for the most part, really good in this game compared to some previous games. There might be a few problem angles and spots, for instance, but on average, I found character models were popping quite well until you started shooting at them. Additionally, I love the fact that score streaks are now on a toggle, so you can just choose if you want kill streaks or score streaks without having to sacrifice any perks for that. For me, throughout the beta, the connection was also generally great. Now, I know everybody's experience differs here, and I definitely had a few matches here or there where I didn't have a good connection experience, but on average for me, I was pretty impressed with the connection experience throughout this beta. Now, on top of that, a few other additions I really like. New mechanics like ledge hanging or the fast swap to the pistol mechanic that we got to toy around with a bit, but not enough because we didn't have enough customization available in the beta. But I also really like that. I like how they incorporated swimming into things. And even some other little things, like when you're parachuting into the map, this is more so for ground war, if you're just coming up to the ledge of something and you feel like you're gonna miss it, I like the fact that you can catch that ledge and still make it up there. You don't just sort of bounce off the wall and then parachute straight down to the ground. It's just little things like that. I feel like they've really tightened up and improved in a lot of those areas. Also, I love the addition of the drill charge as a lethal equipment. I think that's a lot of fun to use. I definitely had a ton of fun using that throughout the beta. And another thing that I'll always give this Infinity Ward team credit for is the art and animations are amazing in this game. I really like the attention to detail they put into all of that. And also on a similar note, they did a great job with the sound design in the game, at least when it comes to the directionality and being able to pinpoint exactly where a sound is originating from. On a technical level, they did an amazing job with that. Now, on a balancing level, I've definitely got some complaints here, and we're going to be talking about that in the feedback section. But if we're just talking about the ability to pinpoint the location of a sound, they did a great job with it in this game. And then finally, one last thing I'm going to list out here with things that I like about Modern Warfare 2. The general weapon handling and gunplay feels quite good to me. Now, there's definitely a few issues with gunfights that do pop up, mainly relating to visibility, but the general handling of the weapons and just the way the gunfights feel, and for me, again, the hit detection, it all felt really good for me in this beta. So there we go, that's going to wrap it up for a list of a bunch of things that stood out to me that I really liked about the Modern Warfare 2 beta. Now let's move into my major pieces of feedback for the beta. Again, I'm going to save the little things for a different video. These are just the big ones that I would love to see some improvements with from beta till launch. And the first thing I'll talk about here is the perk system. Now, I did make a dedicated video on this, so I'm not going to get too detailed with things, but honestly, the whole charging up of perks, I feel, is just an unnecessary change for the sake of change. Now, toward the end of the beta, they significantly sped up the charge rates of these perks, so they actually cut the amount of time in half to charge these. And while that definitely felt a little bit better than the slower charge rates, it just had me thinking, what's the point of charging at all? I don't think these charging perks add anything to the experience, and if anything, I feel like they take away from it a bit. If it felt better with these charging up faster, how much better would it feel if we just got the perks from the beginning like we're used to in Call of Duty? I don't think the gameplay would suffer at all if everybody just got all these perks to begin with. Aside from one potential issue, and that is the ghost perk being always active, even if you're just sitting in a corner. But I think they've already found the perfect solution to that in the past, and that is make it so ghost only works when you're on the move. And if they wanted to, they could make it a little bit more forgiving, so if you stop to reload for 2 or 3 seconds, ghost still stays active. But if you are literally just sitting on one piece of cover or sitting in a corner, then just make sure ghost deactivates, and that helps keep it in check and keep it from becoming a crutch perk. Additionally, when it comes to this perk system, I do feel like the tiers aren't really balanced very well. I feel like some restructuring may be in order, because first off, I feel like there aren't proper trade-offs for gaining certain perks and certain power. Like with the ghost perk, again, this is one of the big ones to be talking about here. I don't really see much reason to use anything but the ghost perk when it comes to that ultimate. Maybe the bird's eye perk, that one is pretty powerful as well, but the other perks in that tier, they just don't really make sense competing against Ghost, in my opinion. Additionally, I always feel like Call of Duty is balanced best when Ghost is in the same tier as the explosive resistance perk, so that way you can either stay off the radar or counter explosives. It's a nice start to a rock, paper, scissors approach to things, and I like that rock, paper, scissors approach because that encourages a lot of playstyle variety as long as they balance those perks appropriately. So that allows players to choose the perk that supports their playstyle, but in doing so, they have to give up some other important perk that supports a different playstyle. And I feel like after the beta, I've got enough playtime with things to know that this perk system just doesn't work very well. And if anything, I feel like it's significantly limiting playstyle variety rather than fostering playstyle variety. As for the next major piece of feedback that I've got, this is something that I feel really does need some adjustment before launch, and I'm fairly confident they will make another adjustment here. This is the volume and range of footstep audio, especially through surfaces and around corners. Even after they tone this down for the second weekend, these footsteps are way too audible, way too easy to hear, and this is significantly harming, again, playstyle variety, as well as the general pacing and flow of matches. In my opinion, this is the #1 thing that's leading to an imbalance in playstyles, and I find it so much easier and so much more rewarding to play in a much more slow and methodical playstyle, pre-aiming things, listening for footsteps, and waiting for people to walk into your sights while you kill them. And while this is ridiculously easy to adapt to, and you're seeing that with some of the gameplay in the background on purpose, I'm showing you guys that I can adapt to this playstyle just fine, I find it to be incredibly boring and not challenging at all. It's not challenging my skills to play like this, and yet it seems to be the best way to play the game. Now, another big thing I noticed here is the footstep issues seem to get worse for me in the second weekend, even though they definitely toned it back a little bit, and I noticed that slight tone down, but I think the problem that heavily contributes to this being a bigger issue for some and not so much for others is their implementation of skill-based matchmaking as well. In the first weekend, I really didn't feel like the skill-based matchmaking was tuned very heavy. I felt like I was getting a pretty good mix of lobbies. I'd have some hard lobbies, some easy lobbies, and most of the lobbies were kind of in the middle. And my experience after the first weekend was actually generally very positive. But then, in the second weekend, I feel like they cranked that skill-based matchmaking, perhaps because they went fully open with the beta, and they wanted the casual players to have a good first impression with it. But in doing so, when you're a higher skilled player playing in those higher skilled lobbies where every single person's got a headset and they know how to use it, I feel like it then becomes who can exploit their superhuman hearing the best. And again, I can adapt to that playstyle, and I did adapt to that playstyle, and it became laughably easy. But the problem with that is it's a totally different experience from the average to below average lobbies, where a lot of people in those lobbies might be wondering, where are all these complaints from the higher skilled players coming from? I'm not having an issue rushing around, and that's because a lot of those players are playing against people that are using TV speakers rather than headsets. And I know, I'm using a headset as well, and of course I end up adapting and taking full advantage of that. I just feel like it's a brainless way to play, and I don't enjoy that playstyle at all. So if we don't see some noticeable improvements when it comes to Footstep audio, especially since they also nerfed the Dead Silence field upgrade, I honestly don't see myself playing a whole lot of 6v6 this year once again, and I feel like I'm going to end up just playing ground war and invasion style modes, because with that larger scale combat where players are spread out a little bit more and where there's a lot more ambient noise going on around the map with all the vehicles and explosions and gunfire, the Footstep audio isn't nearly as much of an issue in those modes. So I really hope Infinity Ward's going to be taking a close look at Footstep audio, and I'd like Footsteps to be a lot more realistic, where you don't have superhuman hearing in the middle of a battlefield. And I feel like if they were able to tone this down by a very noticeable margin, we'd start to see a lot more playstyle variety in the game. Going off of that, I know some people get annoyed that I keep asking for this, but I am going to keep pushing for it because it's something that is a staple of certain playstyles. I would also love for them to bring a ninja perk into the game that noticeably dampens Footstep audio without eliminating it, just dampening it, so it at least makes it a little bit less punishing to sprint around the map. Of course, make sure that ninja perk is balanced appropriately by using the trade-off systems by putting it in a tier of perks that prevents you from choosing something else powerful like the ghost perk. A lot of people say if you put a ninja perk in the game, it will immediately become a crutch, but they also say ghost is a crutch perk, so put it in the same tier. Let us choose which one of those crutches we want to use to support our intended playstyle to encourage and foster playstyle variety. Infinity Ward has been advertising this game as something that's going to appeal to a variety of playstyles, and the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to make sure that they're implementing tools for each playstyle, no matter what that playstyle is, while ensuring that they balance those based on a trade-off system. That is a much better way of encouraging playstyle variety than eliminating the tools that support various playstyles, which is what they've done in large part with this game. But moving on, let's talk about another fairly big issue that I have with this game, and this is the spawn system that they're using for 6v6 matches. Again, I did make a dedicated video on this, breaking it down, but essentially they're using what the community likes to call squad spawns in this game, and what this means is the spawns are flipping and flowing all over the match. This essentially eliminates the flanking playstyle, because as soon as you start to flank the enemies and you get behind their lines, you're just going to start getting teammates spawning on you, and you're no longer behind their lines because the front line has changed suddenly, and this is happening constantly throughout a match. I feel Call of Duty tends to play far better with the more traditional spawns, where it tends to be one team spawning on one end of the map, another team spawning on the other end. If you push too hard into the enemy's spawn, it flips them to the other side. But outside of that, there's generally a very clear and predictable flow to the match, where you know that you have your side of the map and the enemy has their side of the map, and you work with that. This would also have a tendency to work more with the grain of the way that the map is designed rather than against the grain, and I feel like that was often happening throughout the beta in respawn game modes. And I feel like if they don't make any significant adjustments to this spawn system, it's going to be another Call of Duty where non-respawn game modes as well as tiny map playlists are going to be far superior to playing regular respawn game modes on the regular maps in the game. Like I said, I think the maps are actually quite good, but I feel like this spawn system just ruins the flow of them completely. However, they are playing great for non-respawn game modes, and that I feel is purely due to the fact that the spawn system just doesn't work well with these maps. As for the next fairly major piece of feedback I've got for this game based on the beta, that they have acknowledged and we should be expecting some change for launch, this is their user interface. The UI is horrible in this beta, and I just hope we see some very significant changes to the UI for launch. Just keep it simple, keep it easy to navigate, and I'll be happy. Next up for my list of feedback, I'd love for them to consider significantly boosting strafe speeds, or at least providing attachments that really significantly boost strafe speeds in this game. Because the ones that we had access to, I did a little bit of testing with them, and while it did help a bit with strafe speeds, I don't feel like it was nearly enough. And this is one of the big things that's leading to all the bunny hopping around the map, which I've seen a lot of people have complaints about. But at the end of the day, when that's the best method of challenging someone around the corner if you're trying to be an aggressive player, then of course we're going to take advantage of it. So I would just like to see some better tools for challenging around corners, like a faster strafe speed, and I think that would cut down on the bunny hopping issue quite noticeably. Now finally, for my last major piece of feedback that I'm going to provide in this video, I'm going to talk about those red dots on the minimap. And I know this is a very controversial topic, but I do feel this is quite important to the overall pacing and flow of Call of Duty multiplayer. And it's something that I don't feel was ever an issue in older Call of Duty games that had the red dots on the minimap. Now, I feel like if they wanted to nerf this and tune it a little bit, they could just change the amount of time that those red dots are visible for on the minimap. In fact, we've had attachments in recent games like Cold War, for instance, that affect how long that red dot will appear after firing. But the main thing with these red dots is I just find when red dots are appearing, people have a much bigger tendency to move around the map and actively try to engage with other players rather than sitting and waiting for other players. Also, for the people that are just sitting in one spot and waiting, this is good counterplay to those players who, in the game's current state, have the most advantages at their fingertips, in my opinion. So since they wanted to provide consequences, as they said, for moving around the map, why are there not also consequences for players that are remaining stationary and just pre-aiming lanes and pre-firing things? Now, a common argument against this is if you put red dots on the minimap again, then suppressors will become a crutch, but you just have to balance suppressors properly like they did in older Call of Duty games. People make this claim as if this has never been tested before, but it has. We have so many years of Call of Duty where we had red dots appear for unsuppressed fire, and yet not everybody was running a suppressor because there was a noticeable downside in a face-to-face gunfight for using a suppressor. So once again, it's all about balancing and trade-offs, and instead of carefully balancing these trade-offs to encourage playstyle variety, they decided to throw all of that out the window, which again, I feel limits playstyle variety, which is one of their marketing points for this game. And it also significantly slows down the pacing of the match. It makes the spawn system feel worse because it's harder to find that good sense of direction and generally what's going on around the map using that big picture awareness through the minimap. And again, like I've stated in the past, I feel this is also a direct nerf to the stealthy, flanky styles of play because now everybody is stealthy and staying off the radar, and they don't have to give up anything to gain that power. It's kind of similar to the loud footsteps argument. I don't mind if somebody can hear my footsteps really well if they're giving up something like a perk slot in order to gain that power, but now they've just provided that power to everyone all the time with no counterplay to it. And that, I feel, is harming playstyle variety and playstyle choice in this game. And that seems to be the general theme with a lot of the big pieces of feedback that I have based on my playtime with this beta. They are marketing this game as a game that caters to and appeals to a wide variety of playstyles while making gameplay design decisions that seem to directly contradict this marketing of theirs with playstyle variety. If anything, so far with this Modern Warfare 2 beta, I feel like this has the least amount of playstyle variety out of any Call of Duty game that I've played. So many things have become homogenized. So many of those tools that really highlighted a certain playstyle have just been thrown out the window instead of balancing them through proper trade-offs. So when it comes to their marketing of catering to a variety of playstyles, I feel like they've completely missed the mark based on my experience with this beta. And again, my experience is likely skewed due to the skill-based matchmaking, which it felt like they significantly wrapped up in the second weekend. It's unfortunate, but after the first weekend of the beta, I was actually feeling very positively toward this game. I had my small handful of gripes and complaints with it and things that I wanted to see changed, but I was feeling really good and excited for the second weekend of the beta. Unfortunately, after playing through the second weekend of the beta now, it really felt like I was playing a totally different game. And now that it's over, I'm left feeling a lot more negative about this than I was with the first weekend. And honestly, if they don't make some fairly noticeable changes to these major points that I brought up in today's video, this may not be the game for me at all. And that's kind of frustrating as a very long time and super dedicated Call of Duty fan. Now, that's not to say that I won't be doing my job and covering this game. I still love breaking down gameplay mechanics and custom games and sharing with you guys all the little nitty-gritty details of how things work in the match, as well as providing all of the detailed weapon stats and everything like that. Of course, the content is still going to be flowing on this channel. I just feel like it might be yet another year where I don't really enjoy playing it myself, and I'm apparently just not Infinity Ward's target audience anymore. And that's obviously got me pretty bummed out here. I don't expect the game to be catered to me, but it seems like they took it all the way to the other extreme, to the point where it kind of feels like they eliminated a lot of what I look for and a lot of what I enjoy about the Call of Duty franchise. So I'm sorry for those people that don't like to see much negativity. I am feeling fairly negative toward the end of this beta, and I don't want to be feeling like this. I would have much rather made a much more positive video, but at the end of the day, I'm always going to be honest and upfront with my opinions and my impressions. And this is how I'm feeling after the second weekend of the beta. And with that, this is where I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below. What are your general impressions after the Modern Warfare 2 beta? Are you feeling generally positive about this game, generally negative about it? And what are some key changes and improvements you would like to see Infinity Ward focus on? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.